There's probably not a birding hotspot of any significance anywhere in North America that today's guests haven't been to and haven't been to multiple times. Tammy and David McQuade join us tonight. They're big year birders, and that means they attempt to see as many different bird species as they can between January 1st and December 31st of every year. But even among that really rarefied world of big year birders, they stand out because while doing a big year is a once in a lifetime thing for just about anyone who attempts it, this isn't the first time the McQuades have attempted a big year, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. Absolutely astonishingly, they've been doing multiple big years over the past decade. Right now, they're atop this year's big year standings, and they still have another 2.5 months to go before this year wraps up. So we're delighted that they've agreed to take some time out of their extremely busy schedule to join us. So please, everyone, welcome David and Tammy McQuade. And Tammy and David, please take it away.
All right, we're going to share our screen. All right, hopefully you all can see us and hear us okay?
Yep, we got it.
All right.
A second, let's finish getting this set up.
Yep. Oh, while you're doing that, let me just remind everyone, if you have questions for the McQuades, please just toss them in the chat here in Zoom, and we'll get to them after the presentation.
All right.
All right, Tammy and I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity to share our passion for listing with you guys. We started listing back in 2013 after watching the movie The Big Year. The whole idea of counting birds it just seemed like a lot of fun to us. And we started birding, throughout Southwest Florida for the first couple years and just seeing how many birds we could see. And then slowly it started expanding, throughout the state of Florida. However, by 2016, we started to realize that we could actually incorporate birding with our work. You see, we have clients in over 35 states, and we still work full time. And we try and visit a lot of these clients throughout the year. And there was a moment when a light bulb went off in our head where we thought we could actually arrange our business trips to coincide with peak birding times. And as a general rule of thumb, most of our clients prefer to meet, for dinner meetings or maybe lunch meetings. Very few want to meet for a breakfast meeting. So that would typically leave our mornings open, and we would go ahead and work in the afternoon and into the evening. And it would allow us to basically bird, in our mornings wherever we were traveling. So by 2016, we started to see a lot of birds, and our totals were over 500 birds in both 2016 and 17. And by 2018, we saw over 600 birds. And as we started 2019 off, we really got off to a fast start. There were a lot of rarities that were in the area, and we were picking up a lot of these rarities. And finally, we decided that we were going to take the plunge and that we were going to plan a trip to Alaska in the fall. And, we wanted to try and get over that magical 700 number. And for anybody that's seen the movie The Big Year, you recall when Owen Wilson, called seeing 700 birds rarefied air. And we could taste 700 birds as we were, going into the spring of 2019. And sure enough, we passed 700 birds in August of 2019 while in Alaska. As the year progressed, we decided to squeeze in a last-minute trip to Hawaii between Christmas and New Year's. And as we were planning that, we started thinking, if we're going to be in Hawaii at the end of the year, why not start the year off in Hawaii too? And that's what we did. And we were very fortunate that we had a very fast start to our year in 2020, because obviously, as you know, COVID hit. And if it hadn't been for that really fast start that we got in the early part of the year, we would have never made 700 birds in 2020. And again, kind of a slow start in 2021, but ultimately, We went over 700 birds in 2021 for our third year in a row, and we thought, well, hey, if we did it 3 years in a row, why not 4 years? And if we did it 4 years in a row, why not try for 5 years in a row? So far as of right now for this year, we're sitting with 784 birds in the ABA area. However, along the way, we've come to realize that we really love all of the colorful birds in Central America. And consequently, a couple of years ago, we started birding in Central America too, and working on our AOU list. And as of right now, as Chris said, we're not only #1 currently in the ABA area, but we're also #1 in the AOU area. Now, there's a lot of time left in the year. A lot can happen. There are a lot of really good birders out there that could go ahead and pass us by the end of the year. But we're hoping to go ahead and have a strong finish. And last year, we became the first people to actually be #1 in both the ABA and AOU. So again, we'll see how this year finishes up. But overall, off to a decent start. Now, in the process, we've seen 884 birds in the U.S. Since we started listing back in 2013, and we photographed 874 of those birds. And along the way, we've birded in 49 of the 50 states. And if we take a look just over the last 5 years that we've been going over 700, this is a map to kind of give you an idea of exactly, where all we've birded. Each of those black dots is representative of the locations that we've birded. We've literally birded from Maine to Florida, from the Bering Sea to Hawaii, and pretty much most of the areas in between. And doing a big year really allows you to see some incredible parts of the country that the average person never gets to see. So again, that is really, one of the best parts of a big year.
Obviously, when you're covering that much of the country every year, it requires a lot of travel planning. And I'm the one who handles all of the reservations for our cars, airlines, and hotels. In a typical year of birding and seeing clients, we stay 140 nights in a hotel. So far this year, we're around 121 nights for the year. We try and stay in Hilton properties. I'm kind of a Hampton Inn fan. And if you stay with one company, it makes it a lot easier to rack up those points for free stays. In addition, if you know anything about Hampton Inns, they're all kind of laid out the same. So it makes it really nice so that when Dave gets up in the middle of the night, he doesn't run into the wall trying to go to the restroom.
Which I've done.
However, it's not always possible to stay in Hampton Inns. Some of the more remote locations require stays in some more rustic accommodations, like these rooms out in Big Bend, Texas. They were actually renovated aluminum ted sheds. And I just remember how hot it was. And when the AC would kick off, the room would immediately heat up to over 100 degrees. And in the middle of the night, you had to walk all the way down the road to go to a shared bathroom. But none of those rooms compared to the room on Gamble, Alaska in the Bering Sea. In this place, the walls are so thin, you could literally hear the guy in the room next to us breathing.
Obviously, living in Southwest Florida, with our time at a premium, we need to fly to see our clients. And when we bird, which means in an average year, we're on a plane a lot. And, we have taken off and landed well over 100 times, pretty much every year, excluding 2020 and 2021. Delta and United are our preferred airlines, where we have earned, a pretty high status, which fortunately for us, it allows us to get a lot of free upgrades on our seats. But not every plane is as nice as Delta or United. The planes, that take you to some of the more remote areas of Alaska, they're typically a lot smaller. They're usually a lot older. like this plane that we took from Nome to Gamble. Literally, when you started looking close at the seats, they were ripping. It looked like the plane was really old. They loaded and unloaded the planes with ATVs. And the pilot of the plane was not your typical looking pilot. He's actually, you can see him in the middle of the photograph there. He's the guy with the green camo pants and the green t-shirt. Not really your typical attire that you expect to see a pilot in. Being able to improvise on the fly is critical in a big year. You know, your big year will find a lot of bumps along the way. And, you know, like this year, we were in St. Paul, Alaska, out in the Bering Sea. Their weather station was down, and all of the planes that normally fly in and out of the Bering Sea were grounded because the weather station was down. So at the last minute, we had to make arrangements with a tiny little 8-seat plane to take us from St. Paul to Dutch Harbor, where we could go ahead then catch a regular commercial flight over to Anchorage so that we could then get up to Nome to our next location. Now, the bright side was along the way, while we were in Dutch Harbor, we got to see the crab fleet from Deadliest Catch TV series. So that was kind of cool, but you have to be flexible in a big year. However, probably the coolest trip happened when we had promised to take a friend up to see the Himalayan snowcock. A couple days before we arrived, they had flooding that had washed out the road, making it impossible for you to go ahead and drive to the parking area. So true to form, we improvised, and we chartered this helicopter to take us in search of the snowcock. You know, we told the pilot what we wanted to do, so he actually removed the doors of the helicopter so that we could look out and more easily, you know, see, find, and hopefully photograph the snowcock. On a side note, if you're thinking about doing this, if you're scared of heights, don't do it, because you're literally right next to your side. You're looking straight down 1,000, 2,000 feet as you're making the run over to the mountains. But sure enough, we got there. The pilot got us on the snowcock, just like in the movie. And Tammy got this remarkable shot on the right side of your screen there of a snowcock flying away from the helicopter. And I know our friend still to this day considers this to be one of his favorite birding trips. I have to admit, it was really cool doing it.
We also use more conventional forms of transportation. For example, rental cars. We are in a lot of rental cars. We try to stick to one rental car company, which helps us rack up the benefits of free car rentals. We put on a lot of miles in a big year. In 2019, we put on over 30,000 rental car miles. And this year, we've already put on over 12,000 rental car miles. It's funny how our rental car is usually not returned in the same condition as when we picked it up. We end up down a lot of dirty, dusty roads. We've even spent 5 days on Gamble birding by ATV. And of course, that's when the locals aren't siphoning gas or stealing parts off of the ATVs at night so they can sell them back to you in the morning. One of the more unusual modes of transportation, and actually one of our favorites, and we're going to be doing this here coming up next week. We're going to be riding a combine in Louisiana at the Yellow Rail Festival in search of rails, and specifically the yellow rail, which is pictured here on the right. And in case you're wondering, they do put a special kind of release on the front of the combine, so the birds are not harmed at all, which I just found amazing when they flush in the field while they're harvesting the rice. So it's a really, really cool thing to do.
No big year would be complete without doing pelagics. We love doing pelagics, going out looking for pelagic birds. We tend to do about 25 pelagics a year. And typically, we'll spend upwards of maybe 7 nights at sea. Now, relocation cruises are probably the nicest, cheapest, and most comfortable way to do a pelagic. They're becoming more and more popular. as people kind of get acquainted with the concept. But we also still do a lot of the more traditional pelagics around the country. However, one of my favorites, which we're doing this Saturday, is a McLagic pelagic. Our boat is pictured in the lower left corner there. It's called the McLagic. And we take that, out 100 miles out into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico in search of pelagic birds. However, I think the smallest boat we've ever done a pelagic on was actually out of Southern California. And a few years ago, there was a Nazca booby that was out hanging around a jetty off of Southern California. And we spent the entire day, scanning, looking for it, using our scopes. There were probably 20 people out there looking for it. Nobody could find it. And I knew that I knew that I knew on the backside of that jetty would be the Nazca booby. So we went over to a marina right around the corner, and this was the only boat we could rent, a Zodiac. So Tammy and I and one of our friends, Jeff Keatsman, we took off, headed out for the jetty. And sure enough, as soon as we got around the jetty, we got out into the Pacific Ocean where there was a decent little swell that day. Just as expected, there was no Nazca booby. Only a brown pelican was the only bird we ended up seeing there. But we at least gave it a try.
Well, we can't overemphasize the need, again, for flexibility. And as Dave was saying earlier, the ability to improvise at the last minute. Last year, we had taken 3 good friends with us to Alaska. They'd never been, and they were expecting us to guide them around the state. And as we were finishing up our trip on ADAC, we got an email from Sully Gibson, who's a guide out on St. Paul Island, saying that they had a horrible outbreak of COVID on the island. They were shutting the island down, and we would not be able to fly into St. Paul the following day. So that meant we had to figure out what to do with the next 4 days, which fell exactly in the middle of our trip. So Dave actually came up with a great idea. He decided we should drive down to Homer and take a fishing boat out into the Cook Inlet to look for seabirds. We made lemonade out of lemons. We had some incredible views of seabirds, and we caught our limit of halibut along the way. And I got to say, the halibut was very good. Everyone always thinks of the glamorous side of big year birding, seeing all the incredible birds, having ideal weather, perfect travel conditions along the way, right? Well, I mean, really not. But I want to tell you that there are a lot of negative aspects to the big year too, with all the traveling, birding, time zone changes. We're up early. We have to prepare for client meetings. We have late night meetings, dinner meetings. It really starts to wear on you as the year goes by. A big year really is exhausting. And we've had a lot of our friends that have been with us, and they love to take pictures of us when we're sleeping. That's why I always tell all the big year birders, people who've decided, oh, I'm going to do a big year this year, Dave and Tammy, what do you recommend? I always tell them, get rest whenever you can. And here you can see we're taking it easy on a cruise ship and on an island looking for yearbirds. The downside of being so exhausted is that you're more likely to trip or fall or hurt yourself along the way because you're just so tired, you're not thinking straight. And these photos kind of give you an idea of some of the calamities that have happened to us along the way. The top picture of Dave, he was in Alaska. It was really foggy. He tripped and literally rolled head over heels down a ravine and had a really bad ankle sprain. This picture on the right, I was on a pelagic trip out in the Atlantic. It was extremely rough. I went to grab the rail, and instead I rammed my finger into a pole rack and broke my finger and had to have my rings cut off. And then Dave in the bottom right, you can see he actually has a concussion in this picture. We were exhausted. We'd been birding for like 20 hours that day and driving. And he got kind of disoriented and missed a step and fell onto concrete and hit his head. and had a concussion. And this middle picture, we were doing a hike in Hawaii one time. It was an extremely steep, slippery hike. And I just took my eye off the trail for a second to look up at a bird. And I slipped. And when I slipped, I twisted my ankle and I ended up breaking it and tearing all of the ligaments in my ankle. And I had to hike down the mountain with a broken ankle for 2 miles. So, and I was in a cast for about 8 to 10 weeks. So we've had some not great things while we were birding. Not only is it hard on you physically, but it can be hard on your vehicles too. Dave and I, neither one of us had ever had a flat tire in our lifetime until we started doing big years. Now we've had actually 6 flat tires in the last 5 years. This is a picture of Dave changing a flat tire in Box Canyon, Arizona. But on the bright side, we've learned to work together like an Indy pit crew, and he and I can actually change a tire in under 10 minutes. So, of course, that wasn't our problem in May of 2021. We were 42 miles away from the nearest town. We were up in the middle of Michigan. We decided to go down this dirt road in search of a ruffed grouse and a Kirtland's warbler. It was getting late in the afternoon, and there was this really nice board posted at the entrance that talked about Kirtland's warbler. So our incorrect assumption was that it was actually a county maintained road. Well, boy, were we wrong. We got about 500 yards down the road when our car sunk up to the axle in sugar sand. We spent the next 2 hours trying to dig the car out with our hands. We actually managed to dig the car out and get it unstuck, only to have it get stuck again less than a car length down the road. So now it's starting to get late. The sun's getting ready to set. It's starting to get dark. I look, we only have about a half a bottle of water. We have a half of a payday candy bar. We haven't eaten all day. We have no cell phone coverage. The temperatures are getting ready to drop down into the low 20s. The closest town is 42 miles away. And again, no cell phone service. So the only thing we could think of to do was go wait by the road and pray that somebody would stop by and help us. And we were close enough to the road that we also realized that in the 2 hours we were digging out the car, there had maybe been 1, maybe 2 cars that had driven by that whole time. So we were not feeling very optimistic. However, I kid you not, our prayers were answered, and 5 minutes after we stood out by the road, a truck came by pulling this tractor, this trailer with a tractor on it. And the guy was so nice. He volunteered to pull us out. And I guess the lesson that I learned from this is I try to always keep a big bottle of water and some snacks in my backpack in case we get stuck again. Of course, the worst problem was not from our own making. In January of 22, we were in Texas, in Houston. We were meeting with clients, and we had planned the next day, we were going to run over to New Mexico after we finished all of our meetings, and we were going to go for the blue mockingbird that was there. We had all of our gear in our car. We were at a really nice restaurant in Houston, parked in the front row under the lights in a good neighborhood. And while we were having dinner with a new client, the maitre d' came up and said, "What kind of a car were you guys driving?" And we're like, we described the rental car to him. He says, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but we just had somebody come in and tell us that they watched a guy smash out your window and take off with a couple of your bags." Well, they ended up getting over $18,000 worth of binoculars, cameras, and computer equipment. And what makes it even worse is I had a pair of Apple earbuds in my bag, and I could track them on my iPhone using the Apple Find Me app. So I knew exactly where these guys were that stole our stuff. I could tell you exactly what apartment building and what apartment they were in. I showed it to the police officer, but he refused to go to the apartment. So we never got our stuff back. Fortunately, we did have insurance, so we got most of our money back. But I want to say that has totally changed the approach that we take to traveling with our equipment. We We now make sure that we never leave anything in our car. We're pretty paranoid about it, actually.
Lots of times people ask us, what's the toughest hike that you go on? And I think we can really kind of break it down into 3 different hikes. I think I'd have to say the third toughest hike is probably the hike to get the Kalima Warbler in Big Bend. It's typically going to be a 5 to 8 mile round trip hike where you climb a fair amount up in elevation. And if I recall, I think you're already starting, close to around 5,500 feet in elevation when you start the climb. We like to start about an hour before sunrise, so we usually have our headlamps on. And you have to be cognizant, especially out there, because they have signs posted everywhere. There are a lot of bears in the area. There are a lot of mountain lion sightings out there. So you got to be careful, especially when you're starting out your hike in the dark. So typically when we're starting this hike in late April, you're going to have cool temperatures, maybe in the 50s. But by the time you get back down to the car, the temperatures are usually in the low 100s. So the length, the altitude, change, the temperature change, I would, kind of call this to be, the third toughest hike that we do. The Himalayan snowcock hike in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada is maybe a little bit of a tougher hike. I think we'd rank this number 2 on our list. Again, first, you have to leave your hotel typically around 3:30. Again, it's a 45-minute drive from where we typically stay to get to the trailhead. We like to be at the trailhead around 4:15 in the morning. And, again, you want to be able to arrive at the location of the snowcock right as the sun is starting to go ahead and come up. So again, it's a 2,000-foot vertical climb. You're going from 8,000 feet to 10,000, to a little over 10,000 feet in elevation. So I guess aside from having to get up in the middle of the night and the fact that there's not that much oxygen at 10,000 feet, I guess it's not too bad of a hike other than that. And usually you can get the snowcock. However, I would have to say the toughest hike, and Tammy, we've already kind of talked about it. It's the Mohihi Trail in Kauai, Hawaii. People go there to see the Akeke, the Puaioi, and the Akakiki. And I think it probably ranks as the toughest hike we've done, especially in the rainy season, like we did the first time we went there. Because you have to understand, first, you have to drive down this dirt, muddy, soft, muddy road really fast to keep from having your car get bogged down. You're power sliding around corners until you get to the river.
And then you have to hope that your husband uses good common sense and doesn't try to cross the river with water flowing about 3 feet over the road.
Okay, so yes, the first time we did show up there, we did debate it. We did conclude the water was too deep and that the car would probably float down the river if we tried to do it. So we had to go back the second day and just to get to the river. By the second day, the water had receded a fair amount. We were able to get across and continue another couple miles to get to where you go through and you start your hike. From that point, you're not really hiking on a trail, so to speak. They're really more of an animal trail or a goat trail. There's not any actual maintained trails that are managed by the Park Service or anything. Many of these can be very steep, and in the rainy season, they're just slick mud where you're sliding all over the place. The first time we went there, in 7 hours of hiking, we only made it 2.5 miles. We only made it halfway to our final destination. And this was the brutal hike on the way back that Tammy actually broke her ankle on. So you can actually see where, after you kind of get to the parking area, you got to go across the stream where you're, at one point you're about, waist deep in water before you actually start, your actual climbing. While those were tough hikes, I would still have to say our scariest trip we ever did was to Salmo Pass, Washington in October 2019. We had gotten into October and we were still needing that one last owl. We needed the boreal owl. And apparently boreal owls have a resident population up at Salmo Pass, that are there year round. But we had been warned, that the weather could get a little sketchy that time of the year. And this is right up on the Canadian border. And it's about 15 to 20 miles away from the nearest town. Once you start to climb up the road, you immediately lose your cell coverage. And the higher we climbed, the more ice and snow, came down. The final couple miles that we were driving, I mean, we were just sliding all over this road. And it was really starting to get scary because we had no cell phone coverage and we were miles and miles away from walking to the nearest town. And I just had this vision that somebody was going to end up making a documentary about these two birders that were in a car that slid off the mountain road and froze to death in northern Washington. And it was just horrible conditions. Finally, we got up to the spot and we were so happy that it only took us about 10 minutes to actually get the owl. And we immediately hopped back in the car and we slid back down the icy road until we got, down to better weather and got to our hotel. Because you got to remember, we're Floridians. This was terrifying for a Floridian. However, it was by far not our coldest trip. Every year we love going up to northern Minnesota to bird. And we regularly, virtually every time, we'll see temperatures, that are negative. But one morning when we woke up, as you can see in the middle slide there, we had a negative 36 degrees. That's before wind chill. I don't care what you're used to, minus 36 degrees, it's cold. That's cold. On the flip side of the coin, as y'all were talking about in the Salton Sea, this is one of the hottest places that we've birded. And again, we didn't always know about places like the seawall where you could drive up and get the yellow-footed gull right from your car window. We started birding up on the northern side where we would have to have a nice little walk from where we parked the car to get down to the shore to go ahead and find the gulls. And, the first several times we went there, the temperatures were usually, well over 100. The one time when we actually took this photograph, it was 115 degrees there. And, even a half-mile hike each way back and forth to the car, it was just brutally hot. So, we're so happy now that we have a place, at the seawall where we can just drive up, roll down the window, take our pictures and head back out. Our quickest trip was a couple years ago on Thanksgiving. Tammy and I boarded a plane out of Fort Myers at 5:30 in the morning. We flew up to Boston to get a code 4 barnacle goose. We got the goose so quickly that we hopped on an earlier flight. We were back home by 3 o'clock. Tammy threw a turkey in the oven and we celebrated Thanksgiving having photographed a barnacle goose and eating turkey dinner while watching football.
Another frequently asked question that we get a lot is, what are your favorite birds that you've seen? And having seen 884 birds in the US, that's kind of a tough question to answer. So we've come up with just a couple that are very special to us. One of our favorite birds would for sure be the eevee in Hawaii, just because it's such a cool looking bird. It's beautiful, has amazing bill, and it has a pretty cool call. So we really like the eevee. Another one of our favorites would be our lifer Siberian ruby throat that we saw this spring on St. Paul, Alaska. That's one of the birds that I remember when we first started doing big years, I said to Dave, do you think we'll ever get to see a Siberian ruby throat? And he was like, I don't know, it's really rare. Well, this year we had just gotten back to the lodge on St. Paul. It was around 11:45 at night. And we got a call over the radio from Sully Gibson, again, the guide out there, that he had found a Siberian ruby throat in town. So we hopped back in the van. It was about a 15-minute drive to town. We're like praying the bird is still there. Fortunately, we were greeted by this guy. We were so excited to see this bird. The really cool thing is this photo was actually taken a little after midnight, which goes to show you that in Alaska in the spring, you can put in 18 to 20-hour days birding and it's not a problem at all. Another favorite bird would be a Bermuda petrel. We saw this bird in 2019 off of Hyannis, Massachusetts. It's that trip where I broke my finger. We were on a 36-hour Brookline Bird Club Pelagic. It was a totally unexpected bird for this trip. It was a definite highlight and a lifer for, I think, virtually everyone on board. This bird isn't a favorite because it's stunning or it has beautiful colors or a cool bill, but these birds were thought to be extinct for over 300 years. And in fact, they aren't extinct, obviously, but they were almost extinct, and they've been brought back from the brink of extinction. And we got to see this one. I think we were about 100 miles off of Massachusetts. So very cool bird. While we have favorite birds, we've also had some really memorable moments with birds. I can still remember we were riding on our ATV in Gamble, Alaska. We came across this baby crested auklet that was stranded in the middle of the island. You see, normally these auklets, they nest up in the cliffs on the island, and then when they fledge, they kind of fly off the cliff and glide to the water. And a lot of times they miss the water. These birds can't walk, so they end up kind of staying where they're at, and the local dogs will find them and they don't make it. But we were riding around, we found this little guy, we were able to escort him back to the water. It was super cool experience. And as a side note, little known fact, baby crested auklets actually smell like lemons. So who knew? So remember I was telling you about my broken ankle on the Mohihi Trail in 2019. Well, we were trying that year to get up to the 5-mile mark to get the akakiki that you see in this slide. Last year we went back to Hawaii, and the one thing I said to Dave was, I am not doing that trail again. Absolutely, positively not doing it. And he agreed, okay, we won't do it, it'll be fine. So we got to Kauai, and we got a phone call from one of the biologists that was up on the Mohihi Trail the day before. He had spent the spring up there. He was one of the biologists that is actually capturing these birds in an attempt to save them from avian malaria. And he let us know that there was still one bird up there. He was around the 5-mile mark. They were not able to capture him. So he said, if you guys want to go up there, this will probably be your last chance, because if this bird doesn't die from malaria before next spring, we will definitely go back up there and try to capture him next spring. And, we know there are fewer than like 5 pairs in the wild of these birds. So I knew this was probably going to be my last chance to see these birds. And as much as I hated the thought of doing that hike, and as terrified as I was of getting hurt again, I knew this was a chance of a lifetime. This was a once-in-a-lifetime bird. And so we made another attempt. We went up and got the bird up around the 5-mile mark. It was feeding, and we were able to get great pictures and spend some time with it. And I have to say, it was a pretty emotional sighting for us, because we knew that probably in the next couple of years, these birds are going to be extinct. And we were watching a bird that would not be here on Earth again in the very near future. So that was a very special moment. Another memorable birding experience was last month, and again on Hawaii. We were in Hawaii for Dave's birthday, and he'd always wanted to go to Waikamoe Preserve on Maui. The Nature Conservancy owns this property. It's the only place in the world where they still have ko'is and Maui parrotbills. The Nature Conservancy takes 6 people a month to this park, and you have to sign up through like this crazy lottery system. But we got in, And we got to the park, and the minute we got there, it started pouring rain. But we were able to get down the trail and down the boardwalk, and we actually saw a couple of the Maui parrotbills and the Ikoikois, and you can see the Maui parrotbill is pictured here. So again, these are extremely endangered birds, and we may never get to see them again. So it was very, very exciting for us to get to see them. Kind of a fun moment came earlier this year when we were in the Rocky Mountains photographing white-tailed ptarmigan. I sat down, and this bird was kind of in the distance. You can see him over there on the left next to the rock. And so he was kind of clucking and looking at me, and he kept coming a little closer. And I'm a crazy bird lady, so I was talking to it. I admit that. And I was kind of telling him how pretty he was, and kind of just talking really softly. And the next thing I know, he started to kind of approach me. And you can see in the video, he runs right up to my foot, and he kind of looks at me and kind of, you know, calls a couple times. And then I think he realized, oh man, what am I doing? And he took off running. But that was really fun. And final moment that I want to share is we have been going to ADAC the last couple years. It is an amazing place. We could do a talk just on ADAC. It's so amazing. But while we were there, we actually hired Captain Scott Bullock to take us over to see the huge flocks of auklets that are in the area, and specifically whiskered auklets that are over by Asiac Island. It's pretty much the only area in the US you can get these birds. And we literally had 10,000 auklets flying around. And here's a video where you can see them next to the boat, kind of flying around us. It was amazing. And here's kind of an up-close picture of the whiskered auklets, so you can kind of see what they look like.
Of course, not all of our birds work out as expected. We've had a few where we've missed them initially, but ultimately got them. Like the lesser sand plover in the upper left-hand corner. The first one we ever tried for was a couple years ago when one showed up just south of San Francisco. And we had meetings scheduled out in California. And I kept telling Tammy, I just have a bad feeling. I've got a bad feeling, but we've got to try for the birds. So we changed our flights, and we went out a day early. We landed in San Francisco, and about the time we were getting our car, it was eaten by a peregrine falcon. We had two other shots at lesser sand plover up in Alaska, and we just missed the two in Alaska. So we were really excited when one showed up earlier this year in Massachusetts, and we were able to fly up, and the bird flew in, and we got great views, great looks, watched the bird for about 20 minutes, and immediately headed back to the airport. On the top right, we've got the eared quetzal. This is one that showed up in Arizona, and we were heading to it for our first attempt. We were about a mile away, and we had a flat tire. And even though we had the tire changed fairly quickly, it really hurts when you pull up, there's a crowd of people, and they say, "Oh, it was incredible. He just flew off a couple minutes ago." Our flat tire cost us the eared quetzal. We had to make 2 more trips back to Arizona to ultimately get the bird and get these photographs. And we had incredible views when we ultimately did. In the lower left, we have a green-breasted mango. We initially missed the green-breasted mango in 2019 by 12 hours. It had been seen right up till sunset. We arrived that night from chasing a sharp-tailed sandpiper up in Ohio. We arrived that night. Overnight, a cold front came in, and tropical birds, I hear, don't like cold weather. It headed south, and never saw the bird again. It took us 2 years before we finally had a chance at redeeming ourselves and seeing a green-breasted mango. But the longest bird it took for us to finally see was the rustic bunting. And there was a rustic bunting that showed up in 2015 out in San Francisco. And we spent an entire day with probably 15, 20 other birders staking out the rustic bunting area until finally, it was the end of the day. And it's like, all right, it's not here. It must have left. Next day, we had to fly home. And as we were driving towards the airport, I realized, hey, we're driving right by the rustic bunting. And I looked at Tammy, I said, I wonder if we should stop by and just check it to see if it's there. Let's just get to the airport, get checked in so we're not rushed. We get to the airport, I get ready to board the plane, I look at my phone, and it's blowing up with eBird reports of people seeing the rustic bunting. It was there. We drove 2 blocks away from it on our way to the airport. Could have seen it. We missed it. It wasn't until this year that we finally got our lifer rustic bunting. And literally, it took us 8 years to go ahead and finally see that bird after missing it. Unfortunately, not all of our dips have been resolved favorably. In September of this year, we're on a Pelagic out in Hawaii with 6 other birders on board when our guide yells out, "Get on that white bird." I'm looking out there, and the only thing I see is a 2nd-year red-footed booby that has a ton of white on it. We yelled back for clarification, and apparently nobody heard us because we were up in the very front of the tuna tower. And consequently, we didn't realize that what she really meant was get on the bird with the white head. And we missed this code 4 streaked shearwater. Another big year burner, Linus Bloomquist, was on the boat with us, and he's the one who actually took this photo. Out of the 8 people on board the boat, you're looking at the only 2 that didn't see the streaked shearwater. I'm hoping that this doesn't haunt us for the rest of our life. One of the other questions we get a lot, is what's the rarest bird that you've seen? And that's kind of easy because, the ABA actually has a coding system to help you kind of determine what are rare birds in the U.S. And the coding system goes on a scale of 1 to 6, where if it's a 6, it basically means it's now extinct or extirpated from the area. A code 5 bird, however, is a bird that has been seen in the ABA area fewer than 5 times in the last 30 years. So as we kind of go through and look at these, just kind of running through some of the code 5s that we've seen. Top left, we had the dark-billed cuckoo a few years ago over in southeastern Florida. We had the scaly-naped pigeon that was found out on Sanibel, Florida. The Amazon kingfisher in southern Texas. Cuban peewee down in the Florida Keys. Antillean palm swift down in the Florida Keys. Red-legged thrush down in the Florida Keys. And again, you recall our story of getting broken into to go see the blue mockingbird? Well, there is the blue mockingbird. And while my camera was stolen with all of my photographs from Panama on it, fortunately, Tammy, her camera did not get stolen, and we were able to get photographs of it. We also got to see the bat falcon down in southern Texas, the social flycatcher and the spotted rail in southern Texas. Last year, we got the southern lapwing up in Michigan. Again, that's still pending ABA approval. Once it gets approved, that will be a code 5. Same thing with the gray gull. We just got the gray gull finally last week up in the Panhandle. And again, once that is approved, that'll be a code 5. And then the large-billed tern never fails. We leave the state of Florida, something great comes in. We had just gotten up to Alaska this year when the large-billed tern showed up literally 30 minutes from our house. And we kept thinking, oh, that bird's going to leave long before we get home. Well, ironically, the bird's still down there now. And as soon as we landed, our friend Erie Warren picked us up at the airport, drove us straight out to the bird, and we got it before we even unpacked our suitcases. We've got the pine flycatcher in Arizona, Sinaloa wren. and we had a couple red-legged honey creepers down in the Florida Keys.
Oh.
But ultimately, you have to remember, doing a big year is so much more than just checking off birds. You know, you get to see some amazing places and see incredible animals and wildlife along the way. But ultimately, in our opinion, the best part of doing a big year is really the friends that you make along the way. You know, we have friends like the Warrens that will be friends for the rest of our life, that we've met through birding. And to me, that's really the best part of a big year. So with that, again, we appreciate the opportunity to share our love and passion for birding. We'll leave this up just for a second and see if anybody has any questions. Obviously, anybody thinking about doing a big year, we're more than happy to talk to you about it. We're more than happy to talk to anybody about any particular locations if you want to reach out to us. If you want to follow some of our photographs, you can also track us on Instagram.
Well, oh my God, thank you so much. I have so many thoughts. My first is, you two are just so hardcore. I mean, this is, I am just absolutely in awe. Just absolutely amazing. It's I gotta say, it seems like a life well lived with you two.
It is.
I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions right now, please toss them in the chat. In the meantime, I have a few questions. I'm curious about your numbers. Obviously, you know, you're driving to see more and more. Do you care what your final number is? Is it important that you beat previous years? Is it important that you beat other people, that you're number 1 and 2?
Well, our goal in the last couple of years, we just wanted to get over 700, or at least that's what he tells me we're going to do. I think, you know, Dave is a super competitive person. And so, you know, he always wants to do better in everything that he does. And Dave loves to be number 1 in everything that he does. So, of course, you know, it's important. You know, I can be competitive, but, you know, for me, it's more just, I just love traveling. I love photographing the birds, the experiences that we have. So for me, it's more about that probably, but you know, the competitiveness does get us sometimes where, you know, it's like, oh, it would be nice to be number 1 this year again, you know.
Sure.
And actually, I'll kind of take it a step further. I mean, our goal has been to see 701 birds every year. We always want to have one just in case we have a miss ID that we realize about down the road, or something happens, or whatever. So we always want to have 701. I see we have a question from Catherine, and she said, the goal sounds very expensive. Are you willing to share with us an idea of how much you spent, or would advise people to be prepared to spend? And again, this is a really tough question, because
we travel for work. So a lot of it we would have to spend on our business regardless, because we have to go see clients. And because of that, we can write off against our taxes the business expenses. So that kind of helps to make it not quite so painful.
Now, I can tell you that good friends of ours, Victor and Ruben Stoll, they set the ABA record for the lower 48 last year. And I think it was either 750 or 751 birds in the lower 48. And they did that for under $20,000 for the 2 of them.
But we've also heard about, and again, I can't verify this.
And I would leave his name out.
But I have heard about some big year birders that have spent a couple $100,000 because they've flown back and forth to Hawaii multiple times. They've flown back and forth to Alaska multiple times. And so I guess the moral is you can spend as much as you want, or it doesn't have to be that expensive, but you might be sleeping in your car like the Victor and Ruben did, or, driving everywhere, not taking flights.
And you can actually go through, if you're strategic, and this is one of the things that we try and be, because we don't have a ton of time. We try and be extremely strategic. And while Tammy does all the logistics of travel, I do all of the logistics of birds. I sit there and really analyze, the bar charts on eBird of all of our target birds, so I know exactly when the optimal time is to get all of our targets. Because again, we're very thrilled that we're at 784, but really, if we had gotten to 701 this year, it would have accomplished our goal.
And so somebody was asking if we had money saving tips or to make the planning easier. I would say that you need to plan, first of all. So you kind of want to try to get birds all in one area. So you have to do a lot of research. And while I do all of the travel planning for us, Dave does all the eBird research. And so he knows statistically where we need to go, what birds are being seen, and the best times to go. So you just can't decide, I'm going to get in my car and do a big year. You really have to plan this out. And the more planning you do, the cheaper it's going to be. And then, from the planning aspect for me is, you try to look for the cheapest hotels, you use your points wisely, you use your frequent flyer miles. I have the company we work for has a great credit card that gives points. And so I put everything on that credit card, all my monthly bills that I'd have to pay no matter what. And they give you, points for every dollar you spend on your credit card. So I turn those points into airline trips and hotels. And so, you have to be strategic and really think it through.
I mean, I know we could talk for days about the minutia of your strategies and stuff, but could you kind of sketch out in just really broad strokes, like how do you approach the 12 months? Like, where do you go in January? Where do you want to be in April for migration? That type of thing.
You just hit the nail on the head. And we keep tweaking it a little bit every year.
That's the advantage of doing this 5 years in a row.
Yeah, we keep tweaking things. So in January, we like to go ahead, usually kind of hit southern Texas up through Houston, where we're getting, some birds that we need, through Houston. Plus, we've got clients we usually meet in that time period. Come home. We're very fortunate, and you guys are very fortunate because we live in some of the best birding locations out there. If you think about it, in a given year, Tammy and I will have over 300 birds in Florida. You guys could easily have, 350, 400 birds in California. Yeah. So, we're birding from Texas, come back to Florida. We're birding in Florida. We'll go up to Minnesota, typically in February, come back, spend most of March birding around Florida again. April is key. In April, we're going to go ahead and try and pick up as many of the eastern migrants as possible in Florida. And Florida has had really lousy migration the last few years.
Spring migration's been bad.
So we've been going over, we've been kind of looking for optimal times in second, third week of April to fly over to Houston and bird the High Island area for a weekend, and then come back. And then we've been kind of going in May up to Chicago, to Montrose Park, which is a tiny little park. It's incredible.
Really good.
When this year when we were up there, we birded for a half a day and had 108 species, I think it was. Just an incredible park. So that kind of gets us through spring migration. As we get into the summertime, you want to go ahead and be hitting Colorado in the June, July time period. We usually like to go to Arizona in August. Usually by August, you've got all of the birds there. You've got great hummingbirds at that point.
A long weekend in May and in June or July up in Maine or the Northeast will get you a lot of the Northeast pelagic birds, the puffins and the razorbills, the Bicknell's thrush in New Hampshire.
Yeah,
You
usually we
that
can do
in a
that in
couple
like 3 days. We can run up there for 3 days and do that. Our kids actually live out in LA. All three of our kids moved out to LA. So we go out, we visit them, and whenever we're out there, you know, we're trying to clean up some birds out there. Plus, we've got clients all over California. So California usually takes us a couple trips where we kind of,
And California pelagics are really important.
they're huge. California pelagics are very critical. That's usually more of a fall type of a thing. However, usually we try and visit our kids 2 or 3 times during the year. Early in the year, we try and get a trip out to the Channel Islands for the scrub jay. Plus, early in the year is good for the Scripps' murrelet. Then, you know, from there, we try and do, you know, we might do a relocation cruise either in the spring or in the fall. And then maybe throw in a couple pelagics out of like San Diego. We love the searcher trip. Unfortunately, as of next year, they will not be doing a searcher trip. That's that 4-day pelagic.
They sold the boat, so.
The people that run that are trying to find another boat that can go out and do a 4-day trip. And then usually as we kind of go into the fall, we're trying to clean up anything that we have not gotten already. And what a lot of people don't realize is that our big years are typically 10 months out of the year because we actually, you know, and actually we're going to be starting not this weekend, the following weekend, we do a huge Christmas light show at our house that we have, you know, on average 7,000-8,000 people walk through our yard looking at Christmas lights.
Dave puts up, Dave and a couple of our friends that help us. We couldn't do it without them, but we put up almost 100,000 Christmas lights.
It's all synchronized
to
music.
And we raise money. We take donations as people come in to see the lights for usually a children's charity.
So
I cannot get over that. I expect you to go, oh, and of course we dance at the Bolshoi Ballet for a month every March, you know.
They wouldn't want us.
Yeah, right.
No, we don't dance.
Really, we try and cram this in literally in 10 months. Not to say if a good bird pops up, especially if the bird's in Florida, we will try and get the bird and be back before we open our gate, you know, for the lights. And if not, we've got a couple friends that will, you know, help us out, you know, for a day or two. But we really don't travel much
in November or
December. After Christmas, lights turn off. And again, if there's something that we really need to get, that, you know, we might run out on the 26th through the 31st, though. Gotcha.
What's your biggest hole right now for this year? What are you missing the most right now?
We need a yellow rail.
We're going for next week.
Which we'll be going for next week. And then there's a couple rarities, but again, it's going to be tough. I don't know if we're going to have, you know, there's a tufted flycatcher we need out in Arizona. I don't know if it's even still there, but there's a grosbeak, crimson collared grosbeak down in southern Arizona. We still need a Smith's longspur. We need a dove key.
But because we're not trying to set a record, we don't usually chase those one-off birds unless, you know, I don't know. Sometimes we decide to do it, but most years we'll let those go just because it's cost prohibitive to just go chase a non-life bird.
And this kind of goes back to the question about cost, is that, you know, there's a huge difference between getting 700, between getting 700 birds and 760, 780, big difference. Between 780 to 830, 840, it's astronomical.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to set a record, be prepared to spend a couple $100,000. We're not trying to set a record. We're just trying to have fun.
Yeah, well, you certainly are. We have a technical question from Lance here, who does a great deal of audio recording of birds. He'd be curious what kind of equipment and software you're using.
Lance, I'm embarrassed to say I have a 18-inch parabola. I have a shotgun mic. I use my iPhone now. It just gets down to the point. And for a while there,
the Merlin app is what you're using.
Yeah, and I just use the Merlin app. But then I download it to Audacity. I used to use the one put out by Adobe.
But it cost every month you had to pay for the
Yeah,
software.
and after you had to start paying for it, I just said, forget it. I went to Audacity. Audacity is free. You can download it. I think Audacity works good. And again, the problem that I ran into was the fact that it was just so cumbersome to carry around a shotgun mic, and I used to have it clipped on my belt, and I had my recorder and everything.
And he's carrying a camera and
I'm carrying a
binoculars.
camera and binoculars, and it just got to the point where it's like, yeah, this is just too much. And I even, I would pack my 18-inch parabola into my suitcase, and I remember sitting out in Rocky Mountain National Park with my parabola, and it's like, you know what?
It's too much.
When we retire, I will pick the parabola back up. Right now, we're just using our iPhone, and then using Audacity to try and work with it.
If you can stick around, a couple more questions, real quick. I'm curious. You've been to 49 states. What state haven't you been to yet? That really.
Well, it's West Virginia. We have been to West Virginia.
Okay.
We just don't have a checklist there.
We've never birded in West Virginia.
Okay. I mean,
before we were birders.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of great birds, but there's nothing there that you can't find, in Virginia or Pennsylvania.
Well, and the reality is, if you think about it, there are maybe 6 key states for birding. Florida, Texas, Arizona, California, and I'd throw Maine in, and I don't know if I mentioned Colorado yet. Those 6 states are the key, and in hitting those 6 states, if you do them well, you can get over 700 birds just by birding those states, if you really bird them well. Now, if you throw in Washington, you throw in Montrose Park in Chicago, that's going to increase your odds a little bit. And then obviously you throw in Alaska or Hawaii, either one.
Yeah.
I mean, but you can easily, we've gotten over 700 a couple times in just the lower 48.
Yeah.
And again, those are the key states. So, you could easily hit 600 birds, with very minimal effort, in my opinion, by hitting those states.
Are there any of the birds that you're just really getting sick of? Like, it's like, oh my God, another year I have to walk up and find a Kalima warbler again.
Actually, believe it or not, we've only done the Kalima warbler hike one time.
Oh, okay.
We did it in 2019, which was our first big year.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those birds that's really out of the way.
So
we don't
far.
have any clients in that area, and it's so far that it's just a bird we just haven't done, so that's not one we do every year.
Well, that's really interesting to realize that there are, I guess you could call that a gimme if you're willing to, do the hike. It's interesting that there are ones you choose not to do.
It's expensive.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, we're not trying to set a record.
Right.
If we're number 1, great. If we're number 2, fine. We're just trying to get over 700. And, again, we let birds pass all the time just because we don't have the time, or we sit there and look at the cost or the amount of energy that would be exerted to get that bird. It's like,
we had no intention of going back to Hawaii this year, but we were on the searcher. We were already in San Diego, so the flights are a lot cheaper to fly from San Diego to Hawaii than from Florida to Hawaii. And Dave was celebrating his 60th birthday. And so he said, I'd like to try to get on,
into
Waikamoe for my birthday. That would be what I want for my birthday. And we happened to get picked in the lottery, and it all worked out. So, that was a trip we wouldn't have done. It just so happened kind of happened at the last minute.
Okay. Yeah. I was curious, how much were you two birding before you started to do big years? Were you, weekend birders? Were you interested in birds at all before you saw the movie?
Always loved nature, and we would travel with our kids to all the national parks, and we would look at, mostly mammals. We wanted to check off all the big mammals in the US.
So we were listers of mammals before we became listers of birds.
And we always loved birds. I would look at birds with my grandmother as a kid. Dave went birding as a kid. I had a bird book that I still have that was my grandmother's, where I would put little marks next to the birds I saw when I was using crayons. So, but as far as like really listing, we didn't know even what that was until we watched the movie in 2013, in January of 2013. So,
but I mean,
that just kind of, our kids also kind of left the nest. They were all out of college and all moved to California. So we didn't have the constraints of, like, we got to figure out what to do on the weekends because we don't have family dinners every weekend. And so we just kind of thought we'd, give it a try and see if we enjoyed it. And it just kind of became obsessive.
And I mean, I can even remember back in 1991 when we made a trip up to Glacier National Park. I mean, I researched back then in 91 how to find a white-tailed ptarmigan up there because I wanted to see a white-tailed ptarmigan. So I still have the photograph that I took in 1991 of a white-tailed ptarmigan. So, like I said, we always enjoyed birds. I mean, like I said, we've gone ahead and looked at birds since we were, in high school, or in her case, in elementary school. So it was just more the idea of counting birds that was different. We had never thought of it from that perspective. And Lance, I see your message, and actually, I'm gonna go and check that out. Thank you.
Did your bird knowledge keep pace with your doing big years? I mean, were there cases where you're seeing? First of all, we all see birds and we're not sure what we're looking at. But did you just go like, I'm in over my head here? I don't know what these birds are that they're going across the country to try to see.
I mean, I remember the first business trip we took to Washington. We were in Seattle and we had just started birding.
This is 2013.
And he said, let's, we've got time in between our meetings with clients. And this was before we thought anything about big years or major listing or anything. And he said, let's go to this park and let's just see what we can see. And so we took our binoculars with us. We went to this park and I remember seeing a stellar jay for the first time. And I had never even, I hadn't even looked in the bird book to see what the possible birds were I would see, but I had no idea that bird even existed. And I was like, oh my gosh, what an amazing bird. And that was kind of the bird that made me think we need to do this like everywhere we go, because there are some wild and crazy looking birds out there. But I think the hardest part for me is I'm great with visuals. I'm not great with auditory. So bird sounds, it's taken me until the last couple years to where I can go, oh, I know what that bird is based on the sound. And then, we never hear warbler songs here.
We get chips in Florida.
So
we don't get any singing.
I can tell you what a warbler chip is, but I still struggle when I hear a warbler singing because we're like, what is that?
Yeah, we just don't hear it enough. So, I think it's something that whatever we do, as you've kind of gathered here, we have a tendency to dive headfirst in. So, I mean, we have a house full of bird books. We've taken lots of Cornell courses. We've spent a lot of time with professionals that have kind of taught us a lot of things. That we were very fortunate. Don and Lillian Stokes
were our mentors.
So I mean, again, you get somebody that's wrote 35 bird books and have them as your mentor. It really does help.
They lived on Sanibel, and that's one of our places we used to bird before the hurricane. And so we would bird with them a lot. And I mean, when you have people like that teaching you about birds,
you learn pretty quick.
You learn very fast.
Okay. I think, I do have one last question. I'm curious, are there any birds that one of you have seen on a big year and the other hasn't?
So we one year, Dave saw a red-legged honeycreeper down in Texas. And I did not see it. I was right behind him and I just didn't see it. So I didn't count it. And for years, he was one bird up on me until we had all the red-legged honeycreepers come into Florida this year. And I was so excited because finally I was going to tie him. To keep the marriage to keep us happy and to keep us where we like each other. We have kind of an agreement that if either one of us sees a bird that the other one doesn't see, we don't count it.
Okay.
So, and that's even for just during the year as well. There have been several years where, like, I remember, I think it was this year, maybe I had a bay-breasted warbler, or maybe it was last year. I had a bay-breasted
Last
warbler.
year, it took me 5 months before I got it.
To get it. And I would be like, come on and hurry up and get this bird. I want to add it to our list, you know? So, you know, we make sure that we both get to see the bird, or else we don't count it.
Really, the last 5 years, I mean, we don't count it till both of us have got
But
it.
there really aren't any birds that I've seen that he hasn't seen, or vice versa now. So,
Well, it's wonderful talking with both of you. I'm envious. It's an amazing adventure, and we're so grateful that you could take the time tonight.
well, thank
Hey,
you
it's
so
our
much.
pleasure. Thank you for having us. We've had a blast.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Great.
if anybody has any questions, we're more than happy to talk to them, help them map anything out.
Yep,
We
you've got
enjoy
our
doing it.
emails. We're happy to help people. That's part of the fun.
Oh, fantastic. And I just want to remind all the folks that are joining us now that in the next few days, we'll have this up on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch the whole thing again. And we'll make sure that we put all your contact information that you shared with us up there as well. Oh, thank you so much. And with that, I think, Lois, let me turn things back to you.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Tammy and Dave. That was really a fascinating talk. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope that we see a lot of the other folks that are listening tomorrow night at our celebration, our open house at the office. Good night, everybody.
Night.